Hi, this is Emma Penrod here today with TooeleTV at the Donner Reed Museum. It's here at the corner of Clark and Cooley Street in Grantsville. The museum has been closed for the last 2.5 years or so due to some structural damage to the adobe building here. And it's reopened very recently. They had a grand opening earlier this month and should have all the artifacts back in place. So we'll be talking today with some of the volunteers with the museum about the renovation that took place and some of the new activities they have planned for the future. All right, we are here talking with Jay Weyland, who is a tour guide here at the museum and a volunteer for several years. And about 3 years ago, you noticed that there was some problems with the windows. Tell us a little bit what it was you saw.
Yes, I did. As we were looking at the windows at the first part of the spring, and that's when we usually start giving our tours, we noticed that there had been a great change from the previous year. The windows are actually started to be pushing away from the wall further. The walls had a very large bow to them. It looked like they was actually at about 4 inches out from being straight up and down.
Mm-hmm. What was the repair process like? It's pretty extensive, right?
Right. The first thing we did is we contacted the state of Utah because they have some real experts in the remodeling and repair of historical buildings. Mm-hmm. We got their input on it, and they came out and verified our measurements and our findings, and they said, yes, this needs to be taken care of, needs to be taken care of very quickly. Mm-hmm. So we started the process of identifying potential contractors that could do this kind of work and looking for funding. It took a lot of funding from a lot of different resources mm-hmm. in order to accomplish this work.
And what was the process then that your contractors went through to repair the building? What had to be done to repair it?
The contractors, first of all, took the stucco covering on the outside of the building and removed it so they could mm-hmm. see what the damage was. Up to that point, we were all just guessing what the damage was. Mm-hmm. They found that the outside stucco covering was not attached to the building very well, and that created some of the problem. They found that a lot of the bricks had disintegrated from the moisture within the walls. Mm-hmm. And once they identified the problems, they said, okay, we think that we can do this much work with the money that's been granted to us so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so tell our viewers who may not be aware of adobe and some of the problems as well as why it was used. Tell them what adobe is and why we were seeing the problems here with the museum that we did.
Okay, adobe is just made out of clay, and there's being in a lake bottom here in the old Bonneville lake bottom, there's a lot of places where clay is available. Mm-hmm. So clay was one of their big building materials. They would take the clay and make them into bricks, and then they would use that to create the buildings. The walls on this building are about 18 inches thick mm-hmm. and created from those bricks of clay mm-hmm. and mortar. Usually those stay together very well, but if any kind of moisture gets into the facility, then that creates the damage. And also another thing that creates the damage is when you put a covering of stucco over the outside. Mm-hmm. It expands and contracts at a different rate than the adobe bricks, so it acts kind of like a sandpaper, and it's always rubbing off a little bit of adobe as it warms up and cools down.
All right, so we're now over here on the other side of the building here with the Sons of Utah Pioneers current president for the local chapter, Craig Anderson. And we have here with us, behind us, some of the bricks that were removed from the building during the renovation.
The original adobes.
Right, so tell me what's special about this building and its history. How did it start out? It wasn't a museum originally. It
was originally a schoolhouse constructed inside of the original fort. Mm-hmm. For the town at the time was called Willow Creek's mm-hmm. settlement. It's made out of adobe that was mined just to the north of us. They called it the adobe hole. Mm-hmm. It's probably the oldest, we're pretty certain, continuously used adobe structure in the territory. Mm-hmm. It was originally, construction started in the mid-1850s, mm-hmm. was dedicated in 1861 as a schoolhouse and public meeting place. Mm-hmm. It's been in continuous use for several different uses since. In the early 1900s and into the 30s, it was an auto repair garage, mm-hmm. had a door in this west end on the Lincoln Highway, and later the Victory Highway, and the grounds around it was called the Traveler's Rest. Mm-hmm. In the late 1940s, early 50s, it was purchased by a group headed by J. Reuben Clark, Grantsville's favorite son, and largely he paid for the renovation. It was donated to the city for a museum for local artifacts. And then in the late 1960s, they tore down Grantsville's high school, and in the upstairs of it, they had glass cases that had artifacts from the Donner Party that were brought in off the desert in the late 20s and early 30s. And they brought them here for display, and that's our primary display or premium display is the Donner Reed artifacts. And that's when they changed the name to the Donner Reed Museum.
Right. And it took you quite a while to get this renovation done. There were some roadblocks. What were some of the challenges you encountered?
Financial. It's a public building owned by Grantsville City. And as such, it had to be repaired in certain manners that a private structure wouldn't have to do because it's a public facility. So there's engineering concerns and safety concerns. And so it took a long time to get things lined up. And the city was very helpful, and our local legislators, both on the county commission and our state legislators, in getting some funding through the state of Utah to help facilitate the renovation.
How much did it ultimately cost?
I don't have the exact figures because it was in the form of several different grants, including the last one that put air conditioning in the building to help climate control it, which will preserve the artifacts. But it was near $300,000.
Right. So why put all that money into a building like this? Why not just tear it down and build a bigger museum?
That was one of the questions. It was debated. The building itself is an artifact, and that's part of the preservation. And Grantsville has a history, lamented by many, of tearing down some very choice artifacts. One of the most that everybody misses is the old Opera House. Once it's gone, and we didn't want to see that happen.